Being a lifelong anime fan means being a fan in different stages of your life. When you're a child, you come home from school and maybe Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Rurouni Kenshin, they're on TV and you go, oh wow, I can't wait to see what happens this week. Becoming older means reading into those shows. And learning the guy who made Rurouni Kenshin is not someone you want to patronize with your cash. But that being said though, anime in general changes. Any medium of entertainment has entries designed for whatever age you're in, and your tastes and perspectives shift over time. Though of course everyone thinks anime was best when they first discovered it. To some extent anyway. Usually it's like maybe a few years off from that as you really get to learn about the genre, but I digress. You see, a lot of people talk about anime as time goes on. As more shows are produced, more content comes out, and you get to see the patterns that start to form. Your cynicism as a fan shifts somewhat. Well, I can tell you this. I've gone through many shifts as a fan over the years, and one shift that's going on right now that I haven't fully explored yet is that as a father. A lot of people my age are getting older, in their 30s, and reevaluating the shows they watched as kids. Well, I'm doing that through a different perspective. I've recently, in the last year, had a son. And while my son is too young to watch any shows, I have kind of watched some older shows while he's asleep or, being put to sleep and go, well, in about 5 years, would this be okay to show my son? And through that evaluation, you start to evaluate shows in a different light. Shows you used to love, you notice flaws or weird writing quirks that may not distract entirely from the show, but are a little off-putting. And shows you were originally more dismissive of start to become more prominent in the mind. Of course, like any fan who gets older, you want to see more shows geared to your age. I understand most anime fans are teenagers in Japan, and in America too. And so most shows are aimed for a teenage demographic. That is to say, an adolescent boy who might feel insecure at himself, reading a story about a young ninja boy who is made fun of, ostracized, finding power through great effort, and being rewarded for that great effort with lifelong friends. But then you see that guy grow up into a dad and he's kind of the same character. He's a deadbeat father because his story is now secondary to his son, who is now the same age demographic of the target demographic of that manga. And so it goes. Obviously a very subtle Naruto reference there, but you catch my drift. Some stories talk about parenthood in a way that's compelling, no matter what age you're at. One story that does this quite well, I think, is Dragon Ball. In the original Dragon Ball, we follow Goku, a character who is an innocent, naive child, and he's surrounded by companions who are maybe more world-weary, more cynical, a little more self-centered. Bulma, Yamcha, Oolong, Krillin, Tien, Chaozu, Yajirobe eventually. All these characters Goku encounters along his journeys, and they become close companions, or to some extent, friends. And we see his character shift and change over time. In the final arc of Dragon Ball, at least in the manga anyway, there's always that wedding arc that happens too in the anime that's filler. We see Goku now as a young adult, fully formed, taking the lessons he's learned up until this point and continuing his shortcomings in order to confront a rival from his past, that being Piccolo Jr., the son/clone of King Piccolo. It's always a little weird how that works because it is technically Piccolo's son, but it has the memories and basically essence of his father transplanted into him. It's a little weird, but I digress. I understand that the comments get a little mixed up on that, so both sides are accurate in that debate. We see the culmination of his arc up until this point where he is fully realized as an adult. But then the story keeps going, and we see now the next generation. How the decisions of the past influence that which is to come. We see Goku as a father now. And ultimately, a father who is forcibly absent from his son's life after Goku's brother, Raditz, shows up to basically make his brother go back to work as a Saiyan warlord. Also, I gotta say right now, Raditz, very missed potential with that character. I feel like Raditz, they could have done so much more with that character, but then they just kind of kill him off really quickly. Which, I mean, that's fair. Vegeta's more interesting, but I always felt Raditz had a lot of potential, along with Tien. And in a clever twist, we see Piccolo, a former villain, raise Gohan. This is one of the first examples, I think, of a show that dealt with characters growing up, becoming parents. Not the first example, but the first one that comes to my mind because that's when I experienced it as a kid. You see these characters who are superheroes, essentially, as kids, grow up to be parents, and their parental decisions influence what happens next. Even the consequences of combat affects how present they are in their children's life. Now, I understand a lot of people make the joke that Goku's a bad father, and I get the joke. It's from Dragon Ball Z Abridged, though I'm sure the Abridged guys, after a few weeks, were tired of that joke already. Goku's not a bad father. He's just forcibly separated from his son repeatedly. He's a guy who's not well equipped to raise other people, but does his best anyway. And the scenes where he is with Gohan, he is very caring, very nurturing, and what have you. But it's also impossible to deny that Piccolo is just as much of a father to Gohan, raising him, treating him in a way that helps him mature and fully grow. There is a mutual respect and this deep, deep parental joy you see in Piccolo's eyes whenever Gohan does something incredible. Whenever Gohan is put in a situation that's dangerous, he feels pain for it. And in a lot of ways, I think Piccolo is a great example of a father in fiction. Someone who is not literally a father, but sees this boy who he raises as almost a son. And it's kind of interesting thing that Gohan kind of has two dads in that sense. Not to dismiss Chi-Chi's role in everything. Chi-Chi's a major character as well. She has a lot of influence too, and a lot of gags are made at her being so overbearing and what have you. But there is the interesting dynamic there. The playful side Goku presents, and the stricter, more self-improving raising of Piccolo. And both help Gohan to become a really interesting character. And we see shades of that throughout his growth. Yes, everyone points to the Frieza saga and the Android saga, where Gohan becomes this great warrior through discipline, focus, and a refusal to actually want to fight. Gohan doesn't really want to engage in combat. He wants to be a student. He wants to go to school. He doesn't really want to hurt anyone, but he knows he has to. And he also has this great rage inside of him, this anger that when tapped into can be destructive, but also self-destructive. And while Goku kind of encourages Gohan to foster this power, Piccolo respects Gohan's concerns. He focuses on self-control, on self-improvement on a spiritual level, before even pushing him physically further beyond like Goku did during the time in the hyperbolic time chamber. And both sets do help Gohan grow, but they're flaws with both approaches. And we see that productively. It's not that one father is bad and one father is good. Both fathers have an approach, and we see it constructively. It's undeniable to say that Goku's influence, though, is not seen, especially when Gohan goes to school. His goofier side, that whole Great Saiyaman thing, that has Goku written all over it. Piccolo wouldn't be caught dead encouraging Gohan to do that. But that's still a case of fatherhood influencing a kid's development in a way that is unexpected. And all of that's really good. We see it throughout Dragon Ball that way. Vegeta raising Trunks, though there is this kind of resentment towards future Trunks at first, Vegeta accepts the role of father eventually during the Cell Saga, and that comes out when Cell tries to kill Trunks. During the Buu Saga, we see Vegeta really as a father, coming into his own, and fearing the person he is becoming. Fatherhood changes you in ways you can't expect, and Vegeta's fear during that time, it shows us how the fear of fatherhood, the fear of becoming someone different than what you once were, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be arresting. It can be startling. It can be disturbing knowing that the things you once felt passionate about, you now feel very differently about. You are growing as a person, but is that always a comfortable or even simple experience? All of these are elements presented in Dragon Ball Z, and even more so as the show goes on with Goten and Bulla. I do find it funny how Krillin is the most well-adjusted dad, though, of all of them. Like, he's the most, chill, I guess. It's all really interesting stuff. Other shows that show fatherhood in ways that I think growing up were a little weird were Sailor Moon. I always thought it was kind of interesting how Usagi plays more of a big sister role to Chibiusa than as a mother. But then again, that's her level of maturity. She's still a teenager. She's not the mother who raised Chibiusa yet. But Chibiusa's relationship with her father, this kind of Oedipal kind of thing going on, it's very strange. It's very off-putting, especially how Chibiusa's dream is to possess her father wholly, even though Chibiusa is not 9, she's I think 900 by the time the manga starts, and that's just weird. I don't get that part. I love Sailor Moon, but that's always been a weird bit with Chibiusa and Mamoru. But other shows deal with fatherhood in very interesting ways, but not always in ways I think are very compelling or effective. As much as I love Yu Yu Hakusho, I've been critical of its finale for a while because I feel like it introduces a ton of cool ideas, but never dwells on them long enough to really explore what they mean. When Yusuke meets his ancestor, Raizen is essentially a complete absentee father. He's not a bad man, but he's been so trapped in his own world as one of the 3 kings of Demon World, and so ravaged with hunger pain, so hungry in fact by choosing not to eat humans that his stomach rumbling causes the entirety of the realm to shake. He's still an absent figure. Even when helping encourage Yusuke's growth, he is still absent. When Yusuke struggles against Sensui, Ryzen overtakes Yusuke's body, basically possessing him to finish the fight himself. And in a sense, it's not a very good father figure, but then again, it's Yusuke. He's not coming from an unbroken home here. While parenthood is important in Yu Yu Hakusho, it's more a show about found family than the family you were born with, which I think is very good for that series, but doesn't really explore the themes of fatherhood all that well, even though it introduces it as a last-minute twist to add something to the final arc of the series, even though the final arc is underwhelming, I think. And there are many more shows with fathers who are completely terrible. Genma Saotome from Ranma 1/2 is possibly one of the worst fathers in anime history. Not the worst, we'll get there, but he's one of the worst. Many of the things that go wrong with Ranma is because Genma screwed something up. There are many points where Genma does something dumb, makes a bet, makes a deal without Ranma's consent, and that sets Ranma up for pain. It's done for hijinks, but ultimately Genma does a lot of bad, cruddy stuff that hurts Ranma. Possibly the worst thing of all is that when Genma takes up the mantle of raising Ranma to be a manly man, he volunteers both himself and Ranma to perform seppuku if he fails in that goal with his wife. This gets more complicated when Ranma falls into a cursed spring and is cursed to become a girl whenever doused in cold water, meaning he can never be as manly a man as possible while his mother is around, which means he can't transform in front of his mother, or else he'd have to perform seppuku on the spot, along with his father. Father of the Year award, by the way. And it's on top of putting his son up to be engaged to his best friend's child, despite the family never seeing Ranma, never meeting him before, but he's still betrothed to someone he's never met. It's all fucked up on so many levels. There's a lot going on. Oh, and even training in China, despite not knowing Chinese, and thus leading to his son being cursed, which, by definition of Genma's own policies with his wife, means now he's condemned his son to an early grave. Genma sucks. Obviously, Gendo Ikari is another candidate for Worst Father of the Year, but unlike with Genma, where I get frustrated watching that, I actually really like how they do Gendo. Gendo as a character is one of the most compelling and tragic figures in anime. A real, Shakespearean villain. Gendo's entire thing was that he was a rough and tumble kind of guy who ends up falling in love with his future wife, Yui, even taking Yui's name. Ikari's not Gendo's name, it's his wife's name. And he allows himself to get close to Yui once, even having a son with her, until the Eva projects come along and Yui's entire body and soul is consumed by Eva Unit 1. And Gendo, who again has allowed Yui to enter into his heart emotionally, decides to enact a plan to bring his wife back. But he is now hardened by the loss. He can't go through that a second time, and thus pushes everyone out of his life to avoid ever being hurt again. One common theme in Evangelion is that of the hedgehog's dilemma. The idea that people want to be close to each other, but the closer we get, the more the quills on our back hurt each other. Hedgehogs want to get close, but getting close causes pain. How do you negotiate that irony, that conflict? And Gendo does this by choosing to push everyone, especially his son, away. Further and further away, and that tragedy causes everyone around him pain. Gendo Ikari isn't evil, he's not even really a sociopath, because he does feel guilt for his actions. The problem is he cannot allow himself to feel it. He is someone acting as a sociopath who is not a sociopath, and that inherent tragedy of his character is what makes him so compelling as a villain, essentially, as an antagonist. He does everything he does out of love, but his determination blinds him to the pain he's causing everyone else, or perhaps he tries to blind himself to that pain. There's a great scene in the show where Gendo and Shinji both visit Yui's grave, and they have a great moment where both Shinji and Gendo are positioned in the same way. They move and act in parallel, in tandem. This illustrates to us visually that Gendo and his son are essentially more alike than we initially realize. They both act in similar ways due to similar concerns and anxieties, but the difference is Shinji tries to get close to people, whereas Gendo tries to push them all away. Shinji is desperate for validation from others. Gendo refuses to allow people to validate him because that means welcoming them into his heart and causing himself pain. They're both cut from the same cloth, something End of Evangelion even points out in the final moments with Gendo. It's very heartbreaking and tragic, and an example of developing a person in ways that fatherhood can change them, illustrating what loss does to a person in a way that's realistic and heartbreaking. Of course, Fullmetal Alchemist has both one of the greatest fathers and one of the most vile, both in the same place. And yes, this is the worst dad. Gendo, Genma, they're bad, but Shao Tucker beats them by a mile. When becoming a father, you always have to kind of negotiate your pursuits and goals along with that which you need to do for your family. And that's something I deal with too. I have a job. I make videos on YouTube alongside said job. I have a lot of work I do. And so you kind of go, okay, well, how do you negotiate the struggles of fatherhood with your pursuits? Because if you stop working, that means no income, that means no money, it means you can't feed your family. But also, you feel good about the work you do. You feel passionate about it, proud of it. You want to pursue those goals. Well, what point do you strike a balance? Shao Tucker is that anxiety taken to 11. Now, when I first watched FMA, I saw Shao Tucker as kind of a evil bad guy with not much depth, but there is an inherent tragedy to the character that you get when you get older, when you get into the workforce, when you understand people take their jobs so seriously at the expense of everything else. Shao Tucker is a cautionary tale. Not someone who's relatable, by the way. He's not. He's a monster. He's a terrible, terrible human being. But by making his struggles understandable in broad strokes, it makes his actions all the more detestable because he makes choices that are just so destructive, so evil, so awful, so self-defeating, and so selfish that it actually makes you hate him more. When you're younger, he's just a monster who does something terrible to a character you like. However, when you get older and you're confronted with choices where you can prioritize your career or your family, the choices he makes become all the more infuriating. By making him seem more grounded in some human struggle that many people deal with, the choices he makes him worse. I actually dislike Shao Tucker more as an adult than I did as a teenager when I first saw FMA, because he is just such a fucking asshole. And what he does to his daughter, it's cruel. I will make edgy jokes about it. Obviously, I'm human after all, but it makes you hate him more. It also makes you love Mace Hughes even more. Hughes is the perfect father. He loves his family. He is a career guy, yes, and doesn't give up his career, of course, but he is clearly doing it with one goal in mind, making sure his daughter is happy and safe, making sure his wife is happy and safe. There is such an unironic, unadulterated beauty to that. Someone who just cares so deeply, not to an inhuman degree, not to a poorly written degree, but to a very human, very excitable, very warm perspective. He's just a loving family man, which of course makes his fate in the show all the more crueler. That scene where, you know the one I'm talking about. Yeah, put it on screen. You know what I'm talking about. This whole burial scene, like that hits so much harder as a father. I can't even tell you. That was already depressing back in the day. It's worse now. I guarantee you. Some shows, you could rewatch them again and again, but life experience makes you rewatch them in different perspectives. That's why I encourage people to rewatch old shows they like, because you can see it through different eyes as you age. Quite incredible in that sense. But that's also why stuff like Boruto pisses me off, because the parents become obstacles to the focus of the narrative. That is to say, focusing on the kids being the heroes of the story. Unlike Dragon Ball Z, unlike Sailor Moon, unlike Fullmetal Alchemist, the show becomes a vehicle that is impeded by its legacy, as opposed to building upon characters who are coming back. And as such, it feels like they're afraid to take the characters' lives in directions that are independent of where they came before, to show them advancing in ways that is compelling. You know, Naruto is an absent father in many ways, shackled by his job. Sure, he does care, but he's shackled to it. Compared to the Gendo. Gendo evolves in broad strokes very quickly, and we are introduced to him as a father. But we know his complex history, and that informs his development even with his limited screen time. Because Gendo barely shows up in Evangelion, yet is a far more human character, bizarrely, than adult Naruto is in Boruto. It's weird how that works out, right? I don't know, I think it's kind of strange myself. But likewise, there are other shows that I otherwise like where parenthood is explored in ways that's frustrating. Endeavor's arc in My Hero Academia pisses me off, because he does things that are unforgivable as a father. He is cruel at first. He is mean and abusive and terrible and borderline sociopathic, but he does realize what he's doing is wrong. And the show kind of forgives him too quickly. It's not like Vegeta, where he does terrible things, but you can fix it all in a heartbeat. The ramifications of his actions have long-lasting impacts on the whole of the show, and I feel they kind of let him off the hook too easy as the show goes on. Even as you learn more awful shit he does, I don't know, I think they try to have their cake and eat it with Endeavor, and that frustrates me, because I otherwise like the show. I like a lot of the parents in My Hero Academia. I especially love Deku's mom, one of the most lovely characters possible. But still, that doesn't change the fact that it's all so wonky. And that being said, though, they are characters who act like fathers in the show. I think Fat Gum, specifically, is like a father to his students, or those training under him. There is an intense warmth with that character that I just really like. It helps those under him are both such messes. I don't know, I like that character. I think Fat Gum's neat. Fat Gum's a good character and deserved more. I'm just throwing that there right now. Same with all the teachers, really, and pro heroes in My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia does a good job balancing out the pro heroes with the students, but only to an extent. I feel sometimes the arcs kind of forget everyone else exists in the story. I don't know. Anyway, that's beside the point. Another common theme with a lot of anime is the idea of fatherlessness. A lot of characters don't have dads, and you kind of see that impact their behavior. Now, obviously, from a writing standpoint, this is very helpful in some creators, because if you don't have a character who's a dad, you don't have to write the father. You don't have to write someone going, yeah, you can't leave the house after dark and go on an adventure. You have to be home by supper, help out with the chores, whatever. And it's kind of that element that helps make it easier to be more flexible with storytelling. You see a lot of grandmothers, for example, who are kind of past adventurers who are distant, who come in and kind of guide the characters as well, like Dan Dan. Kind of Yu Yu Hakusho to an extent with Genkai, who's not really a grandmother, but a grandmotherly figure. You see this in Inuyasha to an extent with Kikyo's sister, who becomes almost like an auntie-figure while they're in the displaced time period. Whereas Kagome's family is very loving, very nurturing, very normal, and that dynamic allows us to have grounding. In one world we have an adventure, in the other world we have humanity. We have people, and that balance works, I think, really well. But what do we lose by removing that? I think a lot about, say, Akira, the anime Akira, where we have these kids, or kind of a lost generation of biker gangs, of rebels, of punks, and they're wandering without any parental control, without any authority really to hold them to task. And that reflects, of course, the crumbling authority of the Japanese government in that world. The lack of fathers and families runs parallel to the pain they experience by existing in this tough world. That's compelling. That's interesting. That's good, I'd argue. But how does it make me feel as a dad? Well, sadder. You see, when you're a kid and you watch Akira or any show like that, you don't care about the lack of parents because you're following the kid. But now as an adult, you are the father and going, wow, these kids need someone to tell them it's okay, to tell them that they need something good. And that emotional element, sure, it's sappy and stupid, but that's what you feel, Yeah, it's sappy. Yeah, it's cringe. Yeah, it's dumb. But that's how you feel when watching these shows. Because when watching a show focused on characters who are teenagers, when you're a teenager, you see someone who's a peer. As an adult, you see someone younger than you, vulnerable. When you're a father, you see someone who needs someone to take care of them. That is the way the brain is reprogrammed when you look at shows with younger characters, which is one reason why I find it so off-putting when people who are fathers, sexualize these characters so much. Not to say, you can't do what you want to do, but, it just feels to me, very weird, because I look at them as kids, as people who need help, or maybe not need help, but, who are on their own journeys and need support in any way they can. And that perspective, that shift perspective, allows you to have a different amount of emotional investment in the narrative. One example of a very flawed father, who is still a good dad to an extent, but has a lot of issues, Lucky Star. Konada's father is a pervert. Let's be perfectly blunt. He is a lolicon, he is a pervert, he is a gross degenerate, and yet he deeply cares about his daughter. Yeah, there is a lot of jokes that are off-color and uncomfortable, and I find that kind of cringe even when I was a kid. Now I find it more cringe. The show does take steps to illustrate that Konada's father genuinely loves his daughter, and that his lifestyle has influenced Konada in ways that may be considered being corrupted. I don't know. But it's an interesting from a character writing perspective to see essentially a degenerate NEET raising a kid. And of course, there are tons of anime out there that are basically like father slop. Usagi Drop, for example, I think is a really cute series. I've watched it once a while ago, but I want to go back and rewatch it because I watched it when I was too young. I watched it when I was an adult, but not as a dad. And I feel like as a father now, I'd have a different perspective of it now than I would have previously. Another one I think is very interesting is something like Blue Exorcist, where the adoptive father figure kind of raises the AntiChrist in a different way. A lot like Hellboy, I think, where a good upbringing can reverse the demonic programming of even an apocalyptic figure. I think it's kind of neat. I like that kind of stuff. It's not the most in-depth, but I dig it. It's cool. Of course, one thing I think of a lot as a father is CLANNAD. CLANNAD is one of those shows that a lot of people misrepresent it as kind of like a lolicon show. It's not that at all. It's moe, certainly, but it's an extremely sophisticated story that is about tragedy, about how you deal with heartbreak. We see this single father who loses his wife to an illness that we know is coming. It's not a shock, but it is depressing how it happens. And he has to raise his daughter, who we slowly learn has the same illness. And as much as I want to say that Mace Hughes' death in FMA is the saddest thing I've seen in anime, it's not, because I've seen CLANNAD Afterstory. The scene in the snow where he has to hold his daughter as she's dying is one of the saddest things I've ever seen. That made me sad when I saw it in college. And it makes me even sadder now as an adult, because it's like you put yourself in that position. What the fuck would you do in that situation? It is so heartbreaking. It is so sad. It is one of the most moving things. It's almost infuriating how sad it is. It almost makes you angry. Like, how dare you fucking Kiwani making this sad, depressing show with this obviously emotionally impactful scene that you know is just going to make people upset and cry and just heartbroken. It almost gets you angry how depressing it is, but then you step back and realize that's incredible storytelling. If it gets you frustrated that something can be so genuinely emotionally resonant, and it sets it up slowly. It's not like it's a rapid fire thing. We're not talking like Patch Adams here, where they have the emotional, forceful music that makes you feel whimsical and then has the tragedy that comes, oh, it's a downbeat. No, it builds it slowly. It earns the tragedy. Of course, I think a great example of a modern shonen dad is, Lloyd in Spy Family. While Yor is, in my opinion, one of the most attractive female characters in all of animation history and just amazing, Lloyd is not to be slept on either. He is, again, another example of a guy focused on his job to the point where he maybe lives for his job a little too much, but we see his priorities shift over time as he forms a family of spies that is forged for the goal of furthering his agenda. Sure, and everything is intertwined to his goals, but the genuine connection that builds between all of them is so compelling, so emotionally resonant, and so heartwarming that even the show's flaws, of which there are several, because it does get a little stagnant at times, does spin its wheels quite a lot, you overlook all that because the connection between these three characters is just so compelling. Regardless of what memes the internet makes me think of whenever I see, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, no. Yeah. They really fucked that one up. But still, add to that other more unorthodox presentations of fatherhood. I think My Brother's Husband is a really great example of fatherhood in a manga. I don't think it's as well known outside of certain communities, but I think that manga is exceptional in that it does do a lot of things that are very unorthodox. I mean, on one hand, it's a bara manga, which is, you know what bara is, you know what that's like. But it's also a story about fatherhood from the perspective of a gay man, And that kind of presentation of fatherhood deconstructs a lot of uncomfortable myths that we see spring up, especially in American discourse around fatherhood. That having two dads is somehow not the same as having a single dad. I mean, with Gohan, he has two dads and a mom. No one complains about that. The idea of this loving couple in Japan, that's really good, though. I like that. It's interesting to read, and it makes me want to pick up more works like that have presentations of fatherhood that break the more conservative mold that Japan is so well known for. Japan is a very conservative country. There's a lot of things it doesn't really advance on, but in the manga sphere, we see a lot of people who break that mold express how they don't fit in with the rest of the crowd quite exactly through art that celebrates the differences rather than tries to beat it down. As that phrase where the nail that sticks out is hammered twice as hard. And, that's true in a lot of cultures that are more collectivist. But these works celebrate different views of fatherhood, different avenues through which they can be fathers. And I guess if I'm going to say anything and wrap everything up with something that I think is compelling, beyond all these great examples of fatherhood and all these different ones that are less great, I come back to, again, certain points of discourse in anime. I am not going to pretend that I'm anti-censorship. I think that censorship is terrible and wrong in all of its forms. So do not confuse what I'm saying for that. But there are certain discussions I see frequently in anime discourse that just make me uncomfortable personally, and I don't like engaging with it. And that's gotten worse as I became a father. I've always heard people joke about there's a certain amount of anime bullshit you have to get through. You know, it's a great show, but you have to see a little bit of anime bullshit to get to the good bits. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. But as I get older, I find myself more geared towards stories that are focused on adults, you know, reasonably so. But when I watch a show for teenagers, again, not my demographic, it's not made for me, you gotta accept that. You gotta accept that some shows aren't made for you and that you outside the audience are coming in and shouldn't impose necessarily your perspective and say, this is what it must do to be good. No, it's not made for you. It's meant to capture the audience's attention and do what the audience wants. If you're outside the audience, then that's cool, but you know, you gotta accept you're not the audience. So there's certain things I watch when I'm watching the show and I'm like, that's annoying. I don't like that. But, you know, whatever. You're not the demographic. You can point out your critiques, but you have to be from the perspective of, does this critique impact the version of the show they're trying to make? That's important. With any critic, you got to do that. However, there are certain shows that incorporate so much weirdness to it. And I guess what I'm pointing out is, if you're defending a show for having taboo subjects, that's fine. You know, that's great even. But if your defense is exclusively the taboo subjects, to the expense of everything else, I gotta question what you're getting out of it. When you watch a show like Dragon's Maid, for example, are you defending the queer themes of the central romance? Are you defending the cute characters, the fun comedy? Or are you defending the fact that they're just a lot of sexualized young characters? If it's exclusively that last one, I get a little uncomfortable with you personally. If that's the sole thing you're defending. I'm not saying it should be censored. I'm not saying it shouldn't be allowed, but I judge you a little bit if that's the only thing about the show you're praising. If that's the exclusive thing. It's a little weird. You know, it's a little off-putting. It shows what your priorities are. And it tells me you're not safe around the demographic that maybe is the target of the show. Or maybe you are the target of the show. Who knows? Depends, I guess. And there's some shows that are outrageous by design. I think of your incest slop that came out. It was popular a few years ago. Eromanga Sensei was one, for example. And like, that's so extreme, you can't be offended by it. You really can't. It's so offensive, it stops being offensive. Because it's designed to push your buttons, and knowing it's pushing my buttons makes me feel them pushed much less. You know, you kind of accept it's a refuge in audacity and go for it. It's more the subtle things where I'm like, that stand out to me more and bother me more as a father. When characters are so objectified in the narrative, you know, that's a little off-putting to me now. More than it was previously. It was always a little off-putting, but, you know, because of my viewpoint of these characters shifting as a father looking at someone who needs to be raised or protected or nurtured, that objectification feels counter to that. It feels like you're on the street with your kid and someone's leering at them. You get that initial, okay, I gotta protect my kid, I gotta keep an eye on this guy, what the fuck is he doing? You get that kind of willies about it, you know? You get that kind of, the hair stands up on edge. And that's a sign of just changing your perspective over time. And you just have to deal with it. You know, that's the thing too you gotta deal with. You just gotta deal with the things that you like will change as you change. Or rather, they stay the same, your perspective of them shifts. And then you just gotta do the tough thing, which is watch shows you like. For example, I've watched less new anime as in the last couple of years and gone back to watching older 80s OVAs. Not necessarily because they're necessarily less sexualized, in many cases they're more sexualized, but they're about adults typically. You see adult storytelling, you see mature storytelling, edgy storytelling, shocking stuff, beautiful, beautiful animation. It's not a rejection of the modern, it's just I find the more adult stories more compelling, and it's just more adult stories in the past and the present. That being said though, stuff like Freyren, Delicious in Dungeon, all of that is like very mature storytelling and very good and engaging. And it's just, you kind of look at it and go, okay, that's different. In fact, Freyren, for example, also has that kind of parental viewpoint with Freyren nurturing her two wards. You know, that's good stuff. And you get that sense of them growing and maybe them outgrowing their parental figure. That's good stuff, I think. It's compelling, it's meaningful, it's cool, it's good writing. And good writing should always be rewarded. Because becoming an adult does not mean you stop liking good things. It just means your perspective of those things shifts, and hopefully it means you get more out of it than you did before. And so that's what I mean when I say fatherhood changes your anime fandom. It does not eliminate it, it does not destroy it, it simply enhances the way you see things, and things that did not stand out to you before now stand out even further. Well, your will one day be my... I'm kidding.